Welcome to our second session tonight, and we will be looking at I believe it's pages 44, 45 in your study guide. I'll be working from much more extensive notes in this lecture and the next one than you have in your study guide. So feel free to make whatever additional record or notes that you would have. We've referred to 2 Corinthians 10 at different times, but I'd like for you to look particularly at verse 4 that would be in the introduction in this text. We live in this world, into verse 3, but we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not weapons of this world, and on the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. And we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. You are looking only on the surface of things, he would say in 7. And if anyone is confident he belongs to Christ, he should consider again that we belong to Christ as much as he. And he was talking about a potential conflict by some who were opposing Paul. But the statements he makes here are really remarkable. And it's the people that Satan uses to hurt you. Who is the real enemy? I don't believe that it's lust. I don't believe it's greed nor gossip, alcoholism. I believe it is Satan. It may be the instruments, the people that he uses. Your soul and your relationships lie at the heart of a cosmic earthly conflict. Just as there was an intergalactic battle over Job, so there is one over you. These battles can be won for God, or they can be lost to the enemy. And like all wars, the invisible war has its battleground, its participant, its victims, and its victors. And we've tried to fill in the blanks here, and we've determined that the battleground now is the human mind. Know your enemy. How much money do you think that the ones who are in charge, the captain of teams, the owners of major sports teams, the ones who are leading them, how much time do they spend studying their opponents? How many hours and hours of films do they watch, looking at the strategy, looking at the movement of those that will come up against them? And yet, how little time do we spend a conscious effort looking at that opponent to know what his tactics are? This is not against what I've said earlier, that we're not giving our total attention to him. You better turn to your own team. We just need to know that there is an enemy and his strategy. So the human mind, the human heart, is the battleground. In one of the scholars that I read several years ago on this spiritual warfare matter, he used the human heart as an illustration of a medieval castle with a moat built around it. That moat was to keep certain things out. And of course the walkway that would be let down with chains was the way to enter that castle, and only allow inside what one considers desirable. If the undesirable enters, it is without your initial permission, and you better deal with it, or it will, as that illustration we used in a couple of sessions ago, allow that stronghold to be built in your mind. It will be a fort that becomes stronger as you leave it there. So according to 2 Corinthians 5, 10 beginning at 5, destroying speculations. The Authorized Version uses the word imagination there. The imagination is the part of human creativity. Human creativity. This is remarkable, and yet that was man's point of satanic attack. In Genesis 6:5, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thought of his heart was only evil all the time. On that Genesis 6 and 5, I'd like for you to turn to the book of Jude. And while you're turning there, I want to make this point. 5 times in the Old Testament is the term B'nai Ha-Elohim used with reference to angels. And 2 of these are in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, and 3 of them are in the book of Job, not referring to angels as sons of God, but in the poetic sense it is used. Now, I'm confident that the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 were fallen angels. They're fallen angels, and when they were in the celestial realm, and obviously when they came to this earth, for all practical purposes, every instance that we have, but those 5 amazingly strange beings that came, we read about one in Daniel's case earlier. There are 4 others like that in the New Testament. Otherwise, they came in the form of a man. And when they came from that other world to this one, they took on a human form to survive on this planet. If you went to their world, you'd have to take on another state of existence to exist in that realm. And now in the book of Jude, the 1 chapter, and verse 5, you already know this, but I want to remind you that the Lord delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority. That is interesting, but abandoned their own home. They deserted the place that they had been created and intended to fill. These has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. In the same way of what? Obviously, these angels who did not keep their position. In the same way, Sodom and Gomorrah followed what the angels had done. And so angels of God, let's go back now to Genesis chapter 6 and look at this. In Genesis chapter 6, and that's where we are in this particular study. In Genesis chapter 6, when men began to increase and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, and they married any one of them they chose. It seemed that they had the run of the mill and could override the normal procedures of family in the earth. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. And of course he talks about his days. Verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth. Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and after when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them, and they were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw that how great his wickedness, how the earth had become, that every inclination and thought of his heart was wicked all the time. It grieved the Lord that he had made the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. And thus and so we know about the flood. Now here's the point I want you to remember. That God, when he took a rib out of man, he took more than a rib. He split the personality of Adam and placed this in the woman. And it's not until the woman comes back together with the man that they become that whole person able to reproduce after their kind. And a mortal male and a mortal female produce children. And when a creature from another region, when a creature from another order copulated or had sex with a mortal woman, their offspring was that strange flesh. That strange flesh that was so contaminating the world. This is why God was justified in wiping out entire nations, because the devil is not stupid, but he's not omniscient. But when he heard God say to Eve that your seed is going to crush my head and my offspring will nip at his heel, he remembered what the Lord said about her seed. And he didn't know everything that God meant by it, but he knew enough that if I can interfere with that seed line, then I can contaminate whatever he had in mind about the Messiah. And God fought with the devil all the way to the birth of Jesus Christ. In order that, and this is why the Bible tells us that Noah was perfect in all of his generations. Noah was not a perfect man because he sinned like any other man. No sooner had the flood come and gone that he was involved in some kind of wrong. But he was perfect in his generation in that he had not contaminated himself with this hybrid that was on the earth. And these giants, they were east of the Jordan. One of the things that startled those Jews so bad, those 12 men that went up into Canaan, and they came back with one cluster of grapes that was so big it took 2 men to carry one cluster on a pole between their shoulders. As startling as that would be, and as good as the land was, they saw these giants there. And they said, we can't go up there because of them. Even though God had brought them safely where they were, it's as if he couldn't take them the rest of the way. But not only this, but it's not until David's time that when he kills Goliath, and Goliath has 4 relatives, and that's why he picked up 5 stones. He didn't intend to mess with that first one. It's just like when you take a bully on the schoolyard, you better be able to take the rest of them on. They're his buddies. And so that's why he got the 5 stones, and he used them all, and he destroyed them. And let me tell you something. God is really working in my heart right here. I've done some serious work, as Ron and others of you know, about David pursuing the presence of God in worship. And I'm of the impression now that there's something more to that even. And the fact that God enabled him to destroy all of this element in the earth, that he had reason to praise God. And he may be more important spiritually than we've understood him to be. In other words, David was the one who ultimately destroyed the thing that the devil and Satan attempted. And he's the one that wiped it out. So he bears a line of demarcation in the moral realm of this earth. Well, that's kind of where we are right down here. That's where we got to. The imagination, speculation. The imagination is the part of human creativity. And this was the main part of the satanic attack. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. So imaginations within, they become our problems in the battle of the mind. Bitterness, for instance. When somebody hurts another, and have not even made any effort to do anything about it. And I'm sorry for this case, but it may be that you will play the incident of that over and over in your mind again. That does not heal nor correct it. Usually it simply intensifies the bitterness or the resentment. There's another issue here, the struggle for purity of mind in this present evil world. The mobility of our world exposes us to immoralities beyond number. Pornography on the computer is something that is absolutely destroying us. Ways that you don't understand. Without any doubt, in my mind, by the way things are going, there may be some men and women in this very room who are caught up on that evil. If so, you better find somebody that you can trust to help you out of that, to help you find deliverance. And if you don't, it won't heal itself on its own. It is only by the grace of God and the forgiveness by the cross of Jesus Christ that you can be reclaimed. And the thing that is so remarkable is you don't have to go to some red light district or some XXX movie house in some old downtown part of a big city ghetto. It's while a mother is putting her baby to bed that her husband's in the other room, or when the husband's putting the baby to bed, his wife is in the other room. And they are feasting their minds on hardcore pornography. It is of the devil and of hell. And I'll tell you, people, it is wearing out our nation. This might just be a good time. This might just be a good time for me to read something to you. I thought I might do it, and I'll just read it now. And this was written a few years ago. I'm writing this letter as a step in my personal recovery from pornography. I pray that those who are experimenting with pornography will listen and learn from one who was deceived by lust and all that it promised. I often wonder, what if I'd heard a real-life experience from somebody who sat in my chapel seat years before? Would I have listened to his or her experience and chosen a different road? I guess I'll never know. However, here is your chance to get help, so listen up. I grew up in a small town, very athletic, considered by most standards your average red-blooded American boy. I attended the Church of Christ every time the doors opened and ended up at a Christian university in Tennessee. But while most didn't know or see, what most didn't, is that I was on the way to sexual addiction. This addiction would take me over paths I never thought I would travel. The journey begins with my first exposure to pornography when I was around 10 years old. I innocently discovered some magazines that were stashed away under my parents' mattress one summer. I can still recall the rush I felt as I turned each page. And those sketches, those images are forever etched in my brain. That was 20 years ago. The casual viewing of pornography continued into high school. What I didn't realize at the time was that pornography was starting to distort my perception of love, of women, of sex as God had intended it. Dating in high school was always a sexual contest of who, how many, and how often. My reputation was so terrible that I couldn't find a date even for my senior prom, so I went alone. Besides, what girl in her right mind would want to be seen with me? Everyone knew that it was what the trade-off was going to be. That was obviously a red flag for a normal person, but I didn't recognize it. Attending a Christian university would surely be a safer environment for me because all the kids were Church of Christ and they wouldn't be traveling the same road I was treading. Surprise! I quickly found the girls who were trying to fill that big, dark hole in their hearts with something and somebody else also. Most of my college dates were sexual encounters, and if they didn't meet my distorted perception, I quickly moved on. I, too, was searching for someone or somebody to fill the hole that pornography had placed in my heart. Then my junior year, I swore off sexual encounters, but the pornography continued. I could buy it or get it from somebody down the hall in my dormitory. Plus, several new sexual outlets were explored, adult films and strip joints. Wow, I was on top of the world. I could go and see the real thing. To a normal person, this would be a red flag number 2, as a slow progression of the drug to attain the level of satisfaction desired. But not for me. I was full steam ahead and moving faster. Now this is where the story really starts to hit home, and I start to realize that something is wrong here. 2 years after college, I met the woman of my dreams and we were married. I can proudly say that we waited until the wedding night to have sex. However, she was sexually pure, but I was tainted goods. A troubled 2 years of marriage were to follow, and sexual problems would arise. Hey, she was getting the job done for me. She wasn't meeting my distorted perception that I had foolishly fed my brain through the years of pornography. Red flag number 3. I was blaming her for something was really wrong with me. Luckily, we went to a marriage counseling to see what the problem was. What a waste of time, because I knew she was the problem. Anyway, the counselor decided to go over a sexual addiction list with me. Guess what? I scored on 8 out of 10 of his questions, almost a perfect score. How could this be? Red flag number 4, living in denial that I was the source of the problem. Through the grace of God, I realized I had a serious problem. And if I didn't seek help immediately, I was going to lose my soul and also my wife. It finally became obvious where this road was going to lead me if I continued. From that point, I started the most painstaking journey of my entire life, spiritual recovery. It's truly a battle for my soul. And over the years, the pornography has slowly robbed me of my relationship with God, of my wife, and also of myself. The war was on. The counsel suggested that I attend a Sexaholic Anonymous 12-step recovery program. The first meeting was the most difficult thing I ever attended. But since then, I've discovered a great deal about myself and others who struggle with the same battle. My family has had a long history of sexual dysfunction, so I was basically set up for an addiction from birth. Through these meetings, I've seen and witnessed levels of this addiction, what it will do and where it will take a person. And I thank God that I didn't have to experience them before I woke up. This may sound strange, but I'm glad I'm a sex addict. Why, you must be asking yourself. Through this addiction, I've reconnected with God, and I ask Him every morning to fill my heart with His love and remove any impure thoughts. You see, through this addiction, I continue to seek Him. We sometimes must be brought down before we can really remember who's in control. Don't believe the lies that pornography sells to you. It will totally distort your perception of sex and how God intended it to be. Remember, sexual addiction does not discriminate against race, gender, economic, or social status. Please look to your future. Do you want to be a pure person emotionally and sexually for your future mate? This is the only true gift that you can give your spouse. I couldn't tell you the number of times I wish I could turn back the hands of time and held on to that gift for my wife. I know several of you are thinking, this won't happen to me. I promise you that if you are experimenting with pornography in any form, you are already on the way. You're growing up in a much more sexual time than I did, and it concerns me of how society is influencing our decisions. My point, think about, and then he talks about several TV programs then that were like some kind of cartoons compared to what they have today. These shows are based with sexual plot and plenty of skin to boot. And now the internet. It's just another avenue to bring pornography into our homes. I'm 30 years old and I'm finally standing up for myself. Listen to this. No cable TV at my house. only limited TV viewing, no Sports Illustrated, no swimsuit edition for me, and limited movies. I've sat in 100 or more chapel services at the university I attended for more than 4 years, heard several Bible scholars speak, and the only one that I ever can recall was a guy who spoke about how your mind acts like a computer. And he said, if you put trash in, then trash will come out. I didn't realize it at the time, but he was speaking to me. And I hope that this letter is speaking to somebody so that they will not have to travel the same road I have. I hope that you'll be wiser than I was and listen to somebody who has suffered that pain that comes from this terrible sin. Will you learn and listen from my mistakes? I just wonder. And so, in this particular study, the struggle for purity of mind in this present evil world. The mobility of our world exposes us to immoralities without number. The money and the automobiles and the places where men and women work today, so often away from their home through the week. It gives them the opportunity on television and what's available in the rooms of a hotel or a motel and things of this sort for you to need somebody who is a soulmate, to whom that you can look in their face and they can call you to accountability on these issues. We need to pray for each other and to seek that soulmate, as I've just stated. The accessibility of undesirable movies, of books, of magazines, of bars make it difficult to take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. You remember we started with that verse last evening along with another one. There is a satanic snare in our path every day. Sexual lust, addictions, guilt, and shame are ever before us. We've already talked about that stronghold, and I don't plan to go back there again except to say that when the enemy on the outside, and that is Satan, and the imaginations of your mind or your heart on the inside, when for some reason these converge or come together, you have a war on your hands. You have a battle on your hands. And one part of self is at war with another part. And if unchecked, it will become an obsession. Evil thoughts run over the mind in such a way that one may lose control, so that he will overtly perform in a way that is not only harmful to himself, but ultimately he will hurt others. And of course, the one who's in control is that destroyer. That's one of the names for Satan, John chapter 10. That destroyer who sneaks into the fold in a strange way. Well, what is the strategy of Satan? One must learn how and understand how Satan works. That's part of the reason for weekends like this. In studying things of this sort, Paul said we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And I ask you, do we really? How many times has that word been printed in this old world? Maybe 1 billion times, that many Bibles printed. And how often has this verse been read, but it doesn't mean a thing to most people today. And I'm talking about folks that go to church on Sunday morning. What raises itself up against the knowledge of God? Evil thoughts, evil imagination, and aspiration. Satan's tactics are lies, lies, lies. Jesus called the devil the father of lies from the beginning, John 8:44. What kind of lies? Well, I want to share 2 or 3 of them with you in the remaining part of this session. Our enemies sometimes pose as our friends. Lie number 1. What do you mean by this? Well, let me use the illustration of bitterness. I was once wrong, you may say. And you ask me to give up bitterness? All that person did to me, betrayed and lied to me? Watch out, because you are looking upon bitterness as some kind of a strange friend and not even knowing it. You must recognize bitterness as your enemy, and one can only accomplish this by the grace of God and through prayer. And making that vow in the presence of whom did we read earlier? In the house of God. Yes, one may say, I struggle with lust, but after all the rejection and the abuse that I had as a child, and this just made me sexually active even before my years, I should be allowed this small pleasure, and now even you want to take this from me too? But see, you don't even recognize it as an enemy. The strategies of Satan are to possess your mind and to control you and ultimately destroy you. One of the greatest incidences of suicide are among adolescent girls today, so the statisticians tell us. And if you only knew what their reasons were, and I don't even choose to tell you in this hour. The Apostle Peter said, dearly beloved, abstain from fleshly lusts that war against the soul. 2:11. The purpose of war is to destroy and control and to reclaim what rightly belongs to God. Your flesh and Satan want to neutralize your witness for Jesus Christ, to fill your mind with impurity, to fill your mind with defeat, to fill your mind with depression. These are your mortal death-to-death enemies, even though they may pose as a friend. The Satan's lie number 2. It's when Satan wants you to overrate his strength. I think we've already taken him down a few times this weekend already. But Satan and the flesh win when they say the battle is just too large. I mean, I got into this thing from whatever source, and I've tried to overcome this. I've tried to find help, but the battle is just too large, and so you throw in the towel and float down the stream as a chunk of wood and go to hell. I may go with the flow. I might as well go with the flow because that's what everybody's doing. Everybody's doing this. I say again, my sweet dear ones, everybody is not doing wrong. There are some people in this world who don't have a price that Satan can. He doesn't have enough money to buy some people. And yet the devil and God had a bitter argument. And the devil said to God, I can take any man down. Just give him to me. And God, of course, allowed him to take Job's everything that he possessed, and then all of his children, and then his own health. And you know something interesting to me? The difference between Job and Adam is that everything that God took from Job, all the cattle and the sheep and the donkeys and the oxen, even his own children, belonged to God. Job just lost his job for a few days. God stood the real loss. Now, when what you have ends up becoming who you are, and when what you have is taken away, then you go down with it. Amen. If it's your children, if it's your property, if it's your bank account, and all of a sudden the stock market falls, the bottom falls out of it, and you jump out of a window. Because you see, what you had became a part of who you are. And we must understand the difference here. You and I are stewards. We don't own anything. It all belongs to Him. He's just loaned some stuff to us for a while to be faithful over a few things, and He'll make us ruler over many. But you see, old Adam assumed ownership of the garden. And that's why he stepped out. He assumed ownership of the garden. I'll tell you, Adam and Job are two of the greatest illustrations for stewardship that's ever come down the pike. One of them assumed ownership of the garden, and Job was an overseer. He was just a hired hand. And everything that God let the devil destroy, it hurt old Job. It sure changed his day's work, I'll tell you for sure. But he allowed God to stand the loss. He just lost his job for a few days. And that's why that man could say in such desperation, even though you kill me, yet will I trust you. God, even though you slay me, I will trust you. The world says that man was stupid and he was crazy. But I'll tell you, the angels of God bow in honor to the moral high road that man took. And you and I will do well to think along those same kinds of lines. And so, an illustration, Satan wants you to believe that he is formidable, and he will take all the power you will give him. And he will move in, he will move in. In fact, somebody says, if you give him an inch, he'll soon become your ruler. He'll be more than 12 inches. If you give him an inch, he'll just keep on till he becomes the real ruler, inch by inch by inch. Well, the point is, in Numbers chapter 14 and verse 9, there's an interesting statement made by Joshua when he came back with 12 men from inspecting the Canaan land. And he said, the protection is already gone from Jericho. What that means is that God had already given it over to the children of Israel. But it took them 40 years to achieve what they could have had in 11 days because of their unbelief. They were so scared of that devil in the way they acted that they had to do it on their own, and that's always the rough, hard way. If you want to do something for God on your own, that's a much harder thing than letting God do what He wants to do with your own being. And so there were 40 years, they could have accomplished in 11 days what took them 40 years because of their unbelief. And so Satan then wants you to think he's stronger than he really is. The third lie of the devil is that he wants our rationale to believe that you can be good on the inside and bad on the outside. Now, I know there's nobody in this room ever done anything like that. After all, I can watch all those sloppy soap operas and things of that sort, and it doesn't affect me. I'll be in church on Sunday morning. I will watch all of these horrifying movies that are on the television today, the R-rated and whatever. In fact, some of the commercials are getting to be such that I'm not sure I'm even going to be able to watch professional football anymore. It's just that bad, dear people. And Patsy knows so well that the family she grew up in and the family I grew up in, if stuff that's on our TVs today in the form of commercials was in their living room, they'd throw that box and anybody with that box plumb out of the house. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? It's so how subtle the devil is. It's just like Ira North would tell us about that old frog sitting in a pot of water on the stove, and you just turn the heat up so slowly that he boils right there and never jumps out. And that's just exactly how Satan works. And so suddenly, finally, the time comes when we can see something that's wrong and don't even call it wrong. And that's this rationale of saying that I can be good on the inside, but bad on the outside. Well, anyway, we must choose and use the proper weapons. And I close with these thoughts, and I think maybe this will be on that second page of your notes. For the weapons of our warfare not of this flesh. Number one is secular psychology. Secular psychology won't solve a spiritual problem any more than an electrical engineer can do open heart surgery. They're just two different territories. And the only thing that ever even came close to rivaling studying the Bible as a major in my life was the thought of maybe becoming a psychiatrist. But I didn't think about that long. I thought about it at a different time, but not that long. So I have deep respect for professionals in the field of studying the human mind. But let me tell you something. Secular psychology won't solve a spiritual problem. And when you have need of a physician in these fields, you better find somebody who's a God-fearing soul. Or else more damage can be done and take you further down than you've already gone. It's the wrong kind of weapon to fight the wrong kind of war. A second one is the weapons of the flesh include self-help. When you travel out through Arizona and see all those amazing areas and how many rocks God made, He surely must have loved rocks as many as He made out through there. And you stop at these little old places to buy gasoline and to get something to drink, you're so hot. And here these precious souls, these little old Indians, have made these little old dolls. And these dolls have 20 or 30 pins stuck all over them. You know what they are? You know what that is? They sell those things to people to take those pins and jab those pins in that doll and somehow to try to help your poor sin-sick soul. And they sell thousands of them every year. That's not a way to solve this problem. Bootstrap religion, programs of social reformation, the heart remains unchanged. Why? Because no physical solution can completely solve a spiritual problem. And we haven't understood this in our fellowship in years past. We haven't gone there. We haven't dealt with these matters as we're talking about them. And you know that as well as I. You can't fight the devil with a sword of metal. You fight a physical enemy with a metal sword. The devil is spirit, and your mind is spirit. And you can't measure thoughts in pounds or inches or feet because they're not matter. The mind is a spiritual substance, and the brain is the house of your spirit or your soul. God's weapons are not carnal, but spiritual, because they are capable of dealing with our issues, with our problems. And in fact, the mind can and does exist. Oh, it does exist independently of the brain. Sometimes we've said to a boy, son, why don't you use your brain? Well, you don't think with your brain. You think with your mind. And the mind lives in the brain. The brain is the house of the soul. And you see, when your body dies and the femur and the bones in your legs and arms and body begin to deteriorate, that gray matter, 14 to 16 cubic centimeters in your cranial capacity, also deteriorates. But your consciousness, your mind, continues to live. That's a part of your eternity. As it takes on these little ideas, thoughts, and values that got God planted in you as a spark of Himself in your mother's womb. And it's how we condition, how we live by His grace and serve Him in this world. as we make those decisions, we said in the earlier session that Mother Teresa or Hitler, either one, didn't become who they were with single decisions, but it was one decision, another, in a certain way of life, and then Hitler ended up being Hitler, and Mother Teresa. Somebody said recently, what would it be like to be next in line, and you realize that in front of you in the day of judgment there stood Mother Teresa. I'd just rather be down the line a little bit, I think, hadn't you? And that great, that woman of God, and she did, of course, help so many wonderful, wonderful people. Well, what are God's weapons? What are God's weapons? It includes, and this is so important, it really does include the death of Jesus. Something that we just hear so often but do not appreciate. Ephesians 4, 7 through 10, and I gave a whole discourse on the importance of that layer upon layer upon layer of grace that God gives to you and me, and all that enables us to do. But to each one of us, grace has been given, and Christ apportions it. When he ascended on high, he led captivities captive and gave gifts to men. And not only this, but the Spirit of Christ, the Holy Spirit. It's not until Jesus Christ as the agent utilizes the element of the Holy Spirit in baptizing your human spirit that then you are in a position to communicate with God, who is Spirit. The fleshly, mortal, logical, rational mind of a human being cannot communicate with God because one is flesh and the other is spirit. But there is a spirit part of you. But it just lies dormant unless through the Holy Spirit that Jesus administers, then this places you in right standing with Him on the basis of your faith and by His grace. Then you are in a position for some real help. But what we've attempted to do, we've attempted to solve these problems on our own or with other well-intentioned plans that people have presented to us. So not only the death of Jesus and the Spirit of Christ, let the Word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom. Let the Word of Christ dwell in you richly. You cannot teach something you don't know. And you can't know something unless your mind has been activated, has been in receipt of those gifts. And of course, the peace of Christ and the people of God. Now, this is a little, well, it's kind of a strange illustration, but somebody said not too long ago that the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had created a new electronic device. Somebody's coming up with something new every day. But they tell me that they can put different electrodes on the side of your head, and on a screen over there, they can show what you're thinking. How many of you want to sign up for that test? Well, I'm just kidding you. That's really not so. There's already a machine like that, and you know what it is? As you think in your heart, so are you. So they don't have to create a thing like that. That's just a little thing to bother us a little bit, isn't it? And it's already there. And so we have approximately, and I don't know who figured this out, but I've written it from somebody that's supposed to know, approximately 10,000 thoughts a day. And there's a difference between maleness and femaleness here, and I dare not go there. But if all carnal, vain, or unimportant ones were removed, what would be left? How much of the thought patterns you have each day really won't amount to anything 100 years or 500 years or 1,000 years from now? Now, there are important things that need to be taken care of today, and I'm not putting that down at all. And so what if your colleagues, your friends, would see your thoughts as God sees them? Well, if you saw my list, you probably wouldn't stay for the next session. And if I saw your list, I'd leave right now. But the point is, God can deal with all of this. And He has a way. Could you love one another if our inner thoughts and prejudices really were exposed? God does. This makes God's love for you and me even more unfathomable. And for as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. God sees the heart. He sees hatred and envy. He sees racism. He sees lust and corruption. And yet He continues to love you and me in spite of your sin. Why? Because of the cross. And then the 90th Psalm in verse 8, you have set our iniquities before you, even our secret sins in the light of your presence. And verse 13 of Hebrews 4, everything is naked and open in the eyes of him with whom we have to do. To the God in heaven be all glory and praise. Amen.